Tonight, John Ankerberg examines the views of secular humanism and compares them with the views of Orthodox Christianity. John's guest representing secular humanism is Dr. Paul Kurtz, author of the Humanist Manifesto 2 and a Secular Humanist Declaration. Dr. Kurtz is also the editor of The Free Inquiry, the main secular humanist magazine in America. He is also professor of philosophy at State University of New York at Buffalo. John's second guest is Dr. Norman Geisler, professor of philosophy and theology at Dallas Theological Seminary. Dr. Geisler is the author of more than 20 books on philosophy and theology, including the book, Is Man the Measure? An Evaluation of Contemporary Secular Humanism. In Program 1, both sides will discuss, does today's scientific evidence for the origin of the universe point people to secular humanism or biblical Christianity? In Program 2, which view best encompasses the scientific evidence for the origin of first life on the earth? In Program 3, are secular humanists threatening the academic freedom of American schools when they advocate laws that will only allow teachers to present secular humanist views when they forbid teachers to present scientific facts that might disprove humanist theories? In Program 4, are secular humanists right or wrong in stating there is insufficient evidence that Jesus Christ is God? In Program 5, can the secular humanist rationally justify why he is a moral person when he does not believe God exists? And in Program 6 and 7, both sides will respond to questions from the audience. We invite you to hear these discussions.
Welcome. Tonight we're talking about secular humanism, and my guests are Dr. Paul Kurtz, the man who drafted the Humanist Manifesto 2 and a Secular Humanist Declaration. He's also the editor of the main secular humanist magazine in America called The Free Inquiry, and he's professor of philosophy at the State University of New York at Buffalo. And also Dr. Norman Geisler, an Orthodox Christian who's a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary and the author of many books on philosophy and theology. We're picking it up, guys, where we left off last week, namely, is there evidence for the views that the secular humanists put out in terms of the manifestos? And in the manifesto, it says that the theory of evolution is supported impressively by the findings of many sciences. And the evolution of the species is supported so strongly by the weight of evidence that it is difficult to reject it. And Paul and Norman, I'd like to come tonight and zero in on the second phase of this. Last week we talked about the origin of the universe. This week I'd like to talk about the conflict between the Christian point of view and the secular humanist point of view concerning the origin of first life. After we have the universe here, we've got another problem. The origin of first life, and then the origin of new life forms, including man. Okay? Paul, let me start with you. What impressive scientific evidence, according to the Humanist Manifesto, you've got all this, supports your secular humanistic view that first life came from non-life by accident, by chance? How did first life originate on Earth?
Well, you know, this is not simply a secular humanist viewpoint. The theory of evolution is so well supported by various sciences. In fact, I think it's one of the key principles of the whole of modern science. Let alone biology, genetics, paleontology, anthropology. Geology and astronomy presuppose it. We have the notion that the universe is changing and evolving over a long period of time, and we can see this everywhere. And this is confirmed by converging evidence from many sciences.
Okay, how did first life, according to scientific evidence, originate here on Earth? Give me the evidence that you
there are different theories about that. Organic matter probably exists in other parts of the universe, not only on this planet. One hypothesis is that certain conditions of hydrogen in the atmosphere many years ago, there was a primordial soup, and that gradually organic matter evolved in the forms that it took on this planet. This is going back approximately 3 billion years.
Is that the hypotheses you want to work with?
That's a hypothesis that seems, in the light of present evidence, to best fit the facts.
How many hypotheses are out there, Paul?
Science has many hypotheses. The notion of science is that you have a hypothesis, you try to support it by the evidence. There may be new hypotheses introduced, you constantly revise it. The fact of evolution seems to be very well supported by the sciences today. How it happened precisely is constantly changing. But
how can you have a fact and you don't know how it happened?
There are many things that we don't know how happened.
But why call it fact?
That's no problem.
I mean, are Christians wrong when we say that, you sound awfully impressive in the manifestos. It's like, you guys got it wrapped up and we just need to check you out here. And you can let us in on the scoop of what the evidence really is. It is nonetheless supported impressively. Okay, I thought you had some impressive information there, and it's supported so strongly by the weight of evidence, it's difficult to reject it. Now you got a bunch of hypotheses.
The evidence is that you find in the geological strata various fossils over a period of time. And you can see changes in species and the extinction of some species.
You're talking about transitional forms ought to be there.
What's that?
You're saying that Darwin postulated from smaller to more complex, and we're going to have all these transitional forms there, and the fossil record shows that conclusion. Is that correct?
The fossil record is not entirely complete, but what you find is...
How complete is it, Paul?
It is complete enough to support the hypothesis that there is evolution and change going on over a period of time. And you can see, for example, the extinction of some species that have disappeared, that no longer exist, and the emergence of new species. Now, evolution occurs in two ways. One is gradualism, and the other is punctuated equilibria. In other words, there are sudden spurts in history at the same time.
Okay, let's come to Norman. We got those two on the board, Norman. First life as well as the fact of the fossil record. And let me throw in here Dr. Paul Lemoyne, a French scholar and editor of the French Encyclopedia, states, evolution is a fairy tale for adults. Why would he say that, Norman?
Well, I don't know, but I'm tempted to say because he just listened to what Paul Kurtz said. I was listening for this impressive evidence. I didn't hear a shred of evidence, let alone impressive evidence. I heard a couple of hypotheses suggested. Let me quote an evolution. Haldane in his book said that this theory of hot dollop soup has been in the textbooks for over 30 years without a shred of geological evidence that it ever existed. That's an evolutionist. I commend to your attention a recent book written by 3 scientists entitled The Mystery of Life's Origin, where they totally destroy the credibility of the spontaneous generation view. And even Fred Hoyle, whom he knows very well, a former atheist, who started to figure out what would the chances be of life evolving on Earth by pure chance or coming from outer space, and he concluded that the chances for a single-cell animal evolving on Earth would be 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power. That's more atoms than there are in the whole universe. So the former atheist Fred Hoyle concluded there must have been an intelligent creator of first life, and his colleague Wick Ramasinghe said, believing that life came by chance is like believing that Boeing 747 resulted from a tornado going through a junkyard. You have to have a lot of faith to believe that.
Well, the Boeing 747 evolved. We can go back and see the Wright brothers, the first kind of airplane that they created. In a period of time, there's an evolution. Yes, that they invented.
Or by chance?
But there's the period of time in which these forms
But didn't they create those airplanes via intelligence, or did they just...
I was using the analogy that he was doing.
You're helping my argument.
Well, no, are you
better drop that one. Find another one.
No, that's a meaningful... It seems to me the point I made is a good point, because there has been a change in airplanes from the simplest to the more complex. But are you denying the existence, Norman Geisler, are you denying the existence of evolution? Is this what you're saying?
I'm saying there is not a shred of evidence for macroevolution. Not only is there no impressive evidence, there's not a shred of evidence for macroevolution. How about that for a different view?
Well, then what do you do with paleontology, geology, anthropology, all the sciences, which have found different forms of life through different periods of time, and you can reconstruct a kind of line of development.
But Paul, I'm sure that you're familiar with your buddies like Gould at Harvard and all these guys. I mean, why are they changing their theories? They don't buy that anymore.
The change of a theory is to the credit of science. Science is not absolute, it's not fixed, it's not final. It's an open method of investigation.
But they went away from what you're talking about, is what I'm saying.
Well, you have both processes happening at the same time. You have chance mutations which occur in certain species, and these are adaptable, and that then by means of natural selection and by differential reproduction, this mutation, because it is adaptable, is passed down to other members of the same species, and so there is a change in the species that
Paul,
occurs.
you're so lovable. I tell you, I could put my arms right around you, but I tell you, I've got to say that
John
checking out
you're lovable too, but are you rejecting evolution?
in a big-time way, because I'm reading
Really?
your buddies. Yes, sir.
I see. Well, let's leave love aside and let's deal with the evidence of cognition.
Okay, let's deal with the evidence. Let me deal with
let's
the
go to the
evidence.
evidence.
Gould of Harvard, for example, one of the head paleontologists in America, I met him at the Arkansas trial. He says there is no evidence for the so-called missing links. All you have are really the leaves on the tree. The tree is drawn by the evolutionists. The tree doesn't exist out there in nature. The head paleontologist of the British Museum, Dr. Colin Patterson, whom I talked to not too long ago, gave a speech here in November 1981 to the top scientists in America. He said not only is evolution no knowledge, it is anti-knowledge. And I've worked on this stuff 18 years and know nothing from it. And he concluded the missing links are not only missing, they never were there, and they will never be found. And he said if I knew of any, I would have put them in my book because I'm an evolutionist, but he admits that they aren't there. Now, what the evidence shows is that new forms of life come into existence suddenly, in complete functional form, and disappear suddenly. That looks like creation to me, not evolution.
Yeah, some of those things are what? Walruses, sea lions, bats. You know, those are just a few that, from what I've read in the paleontology books, is all of a sudden, voila, they're there, and they go all the way back, and they're the same way all the way back.
Are you suggesting that God intervenes in history and creates these species and then destroys them? Is this your point?
No, my point is that God intervenes in history and creates them.
And destroys them too?
No, he doesn't destroy them.
Well, who destroyed the dinosaur?
The dinosaurs were destroyed at the flood. Did you ever hear about the book of Genesis
And
where
when-
Noah took all these animals in the ark?
I heard
and there
about it,
was
but
a
I'm
flood?
shocked that you believe in it, actually. But
Well,
maybe I should know better.
No, you shouldn't be shocked to believe in it. The
The
Bible is...
dinosaurs were destroyed 10,000 years ago?
The dinosaurs, we didn't say that the universe was only 10,000. You just said
when
that.
did the flood occur?
I don't know when the flood
Well, I
occurred.
thought you were quoting the Bible.
The Bible doesn't say when the flood
Okay,
occurred.
can you give a suggestion of when it
I
occurred?
most certainly can give
Yes,
a
about
suggestion.
how long ago?
It occurred in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, 7, and 8.
Okay.
And the
How
record
long
there
ago?
is historical.
Well.
And for that matter, we know that because the Ebla tablets that have recently been discovered give us time periods back into the first 11 chapters of Genesis where these are historical events. They name city and places. This is not myth. This is history that's recorded
It's
in early
historical
chapters.
myth, but or
Not a
mythological
historical
history.
myth
but,
either.
Okay, but did the flood occur 10 million years ago?
Doesn't matter when it occurred.
Well, can you give me some time
The
scale?
point is this, that God intervened in history. You asked me, did he intervene? Yes, we know because when things come into existence, they're fully formed. Yes, we know because they're fully functioning. The first bird had feathers and could fly. It didn't come with half feathers or scales on it. It was fully formed feathers and could fly.
Okay, but did the flood occur 10 million years ago?
Doesn't matter when it occurred.
Well, can you give me some time
The
scale?
point is this, that God intervened in history. You asked me, did he intervene? Yes, we know because when things come into existence, they're fully formed. Yes, we know because they're fully functioning. The first bird had feathers and could fly. It didn't come with half feathers or scales on it. It was fully formed feathers and could fly.
Also, can I jump in here at the evolution creation trial? There was a guy that I think showed up from one of the laboratories and talked about polonium halos that has a bearing on the flood here. Maybe you could bring us up to date on what that was.
Yes, they never answered that. Dr. Robert Gentry talked about polonium halos, which are half-life halos, and they exist in bedrock, granite, and coal all over the world. They're daughter halos, and all of the basic granite would have had to come into existence in less than 3.5 minutes because they're 3.5-minute half-life. No one has ever even attempted to refute that.
You know, there are species that have been extinct
that?
within our own lifetime, and I just want to ask you, were all the species that extinct, were they extinct at the time of the flood? What about the saber-toothed tiger,
we're now
which is
talking
recent?
about polonium
Well, I'm
halos.
interested in
Can you refute the argument that Robert Gentry gave?
Which argument?
The argument about the polonium halos, which have a half-life of 3.5 minutes and are bedrock, granite, and coal all over the world, and therefore they would have had to have come into existence in less than 3.5 minutes.
I've not investigated that question, so I will reserve judgment about it. But I'm surprised that you say that the dinosaur was not extinct 20, 30 million years ago, but more recently, where all the scientific evidence suggests that there was a meteor shower as one hypothesis, and that there was insufficient food on the planet, and this was the reason for the extinction of the dinosaurs.
All the
it had nothing to do with
scientific
the flood.
evidence suggests is one hypothesis. You contradict yourself in one sentence there. If all the scientific evidence suggests it, it's not one hypothesis.
Well, but to claim that the dinosaurs were killed by a flood is completely unsupportable by any evidence at all.
To claim they were killed by a meteor shower all over the world and everything else didn't die too is also completely unsupportable.
It's not completely unsupportable, because at least you have a range of testable evidence in the sciences where you're drawing simply upon the Bible, which is based upon faith. Now, if you maintain
the Bible is not based on faith; it's based on fact.
If you maintain there was a Noachian flood, and if the flood had to be as high as Mount Ararat, then it is estimated there would have had to have been 3 miles of water to cover the earth.
You're assuming that the water had to be as deep all over the world, number one. You're assuming that Mount Ararat is the same height, number two. And you're assuming that there isn't that water available, number three. All those are assumptions.
Well,
Prove them.
But if the whole, according to the Bible, if the whole earth was covered by water, then you would have to cover the highest mountain peak, and you would have to have an awful lot of water to do so.
Even the water in this glass peaks. You can have water 2 miles deep here, and just a little over there could be 1 mile deep, and it could still cover the whole earth. All it says is it covered Mount Ararat by that height. It didn't say that everywhere in the world, every mountain that now exists at its present height was covered by that distance. You're adding to the Bible in order to refute the Bible. That's a straw man.
In order to kill all of life on the planet, you would have to cover all portions of the planet. You maintain that the flood was not universal and did not cover the whole planet.
No, I maintain the flood was universal
and covered the whole planet
and killed everybody except 8 people. And all of the animals that Noah brought in the ark were saved.
All of the million species that he brought into the
Not
ark.
a million species that he brought into the ark.
Estimated there are a million species today.
Yes, but species is an artificial category that scientists created. It's not a natural category. The kinds of Genesis are not to be equated with the species.
Well, you have
of
wide
science.
diversity of species on the earth at the present, and presumably if they were saved in the ark, the ark would have to be awful large in order to contain all the species.
It's been proven that the ark is large enough to contain all the thousands of kinds of animals that there are.
Well, that is highly questionable. Not only contain the animals, but the food. Who would clean the manure, for example, in Noah's Ark?
It's not highly questionable. It is mathematically provable. All you have to do is get your calculator out, figure the thousands of animals there were, figure the size of the ark, and there's plenty of room for all of them. Noah had a ventilating system in the ark. It even indicates it there in Genesis. And the manure was good fertilizer after he got out.
All right, let me.
But he had trouble walking through it.
Norman, I want to move on to another question, but we do want to talk about what do you have to say concerning first life here? What's the scientific evidence as far as you're concerned concerning first life?
The scientific evidence for first life is very strong. Dr. Yaki, in the Journal of Theoretical Biology in 1981, wrote an article where he showed that the new information theory discovered by Bell Laboratories proves that there's a mathematical identity between the specified complexity you find in the DNA and the kind of information you find, let's say, in a dictionary or an encyclopedia. Now, the first living thing, a single-cell animal, has enough information that, if spelled out in English, would fill 1 volume of an encyclopedia. And to believe that that happened by an explosion in a printing shop, say, is irrational. To believe that an intelligent being can put that together is rational. Now, what I would like to suggest is there are 2 alternatives. Either non-intelligent force put all that specified complexity together, or an intelligent being. I'd like to see a shred of evidence in the present from Dr. Kurtz, a shred of evidence to show that regularly, repeatedly, and science is built on regularity and repeatability, that non-intelligent forces can produce specified complexity as great as a dictionary.
Well, encyclopedia is created by human beings, so the analogy doesn't follow. You have various forms of being in the universe with various degrees of complexity. I don't see where you have to invoke some mystical, hidden, occult, intelligent being in order to explain it.
Mystical,
I take nature as I
find.
Take nature as you find it, with all of the complexies, and you describe it and
I
account
am taking
for it
nature
as best
as I find
you can,
it, and then I'm
without
asking
reading in something beyond the evidence.
questions. What caused this? That's
Well, I don't have. Look,
cause.
I said earlier I was a skeptic. I don't know the causes of everything. If I don't
Do you know the cause of anything?
Yes. But if I don't know the cause of something, I will suspend judgment. A cause is an effort at a regularity. A
Well, let me
cause
ask
is an
you this
effort at
then.
an explanation.
If you saw Mount Rushmore, would you assume, even if you had never seen, that it had an intelligent cause?
Because I know people have used a chisel in order to chisel
But just
the faces.
looking at Mount Rushmore and seeing those faces, you would assume an intelligent cause of that.
Of course.
Okay.
Because I've seen the intelligent being created.
There is more specified complexity and intelligent information in the first DNA than there is on Mount Rushmore. Why won't you assume an intelligent cause of that?
Because here's an analogy that you're reading into nature, because I can see the sculptor create Mount Rushmore, but I have not seen any sculptor
But you didn't see
impart.
the sculptor create Mount Rushmore. All you see is Mount Rushmore, and you assume an intelligent cause.
Because as a matter of fact, I did see it, so that's a bad analogy, and you did too. But we know about human culture, we know human beings create statues. All right, so this is something we observe. But you're going far beyond the
But see,
observation,
that's the whole
and you're
point.
not taking nature as you find it with
No,
all
I
of
am
its complexity,
I'm taking
of which
nature
we are
exactly
a part.
as I find it, and I'm observing that whenever you have specified complexity, complex information, it always had an intelligent cause.
No, that doesn't necessarily follow. That doesn't follow.
Do you know of
doesn't
any,
follow about nature.
Let me finish. Do you know of any cases where you have a regular production of complex information, such as on Mount Rushmore or DNA, where a non-intelligent force produces?
Yes, throughout nature, constantly.
Never.
Yes,
Never.
in physics,
Give me one.
in physics, and biology, and anthropology, and all the data that
That
we
already
find.
has a specified-
You have complexity. You have regularity. You have nature
But
taking on order.
But the
You don't have to read in a
complexity is
designer.
already there. And we
It's
trace
part
it
of
back to
nature.
the beginning. How did the first...
You don't have to trace it back to the beginning.
But see, that's just reduplicating.
It's what you
That's
find.
just a Xerox machine
You formulate
reduplicating.
causal hypotheses, and you
All you're
explain
s-
these. You make predictions.
All you're saying is that, look, I have this page, and this page shows intelligent information, and I make a Xerox copy of it, a Xerox copy, and so that proves that there was no intelligence to produce the first page.
The page was produced by human beings. There's no problem here.
By
But
an
you can't
intelligent being, right?
By human beings, okay. But you have degrees of complexity in other parts of nature, and there's no evidence that they were produced by human beings or
Well,
by God.
if
You're reading in
every
intelligence.
time you get specified complexity, there's always an intelligent being. If over and
You're
over,
assuming
let me
what you
finish,
set out to
that David Hume said that constant conjunction is the basis for rational conclusions. You see cause and effect connected over and over, and you assume a connection. If over and over and over again, every time you blow a fan on alphabet soup, you get a mess. If every time you drop a bomb in a printing shop, you get a mess. But then you see a dictionary, or you see spelled out with alphabet soup on the table, I love you, sign Mary. What do you always assume rationally? An intelligent cause.
I don't assume that. You do.
You don't
I find
assume,
regularities.
You don't
I find
assume that?
Yes, I
You don't-
find
you-
regularity.
If you came to your breakfast
No.
table and said, I love you, Paul Kurtz, signed your wife, you wouldn't assume an intelligent being did that?
Yes, in the human context.
Oh,
in the
well,
human
you would.
context. But you're going beyond that.
Well, of course
I find
we're going
regularities
beyond that.
in nature, and one doesn't necessarily mean that there's an
why
architect
would
of
you
nature.
assume
Okay,
an
okay,
intelligent
fellas,
being did that
order
and
that
not
doesn't
the
We got to
first
move on
designer.
here. All right, we're into the discussion, and next week we're going to take this discussion into the public schools, so please join us.